Reality is already virtual. So what do we want to do with it? Instead of thinking about XR as a simulation, I want us to think about XR as an illusion. Once you understand that it's all an illusion and it's all pieces together, you can really craft some very useful illusions. So instead of simulating reality, what if we made a different reality that was better? But the crazy thing about XR is it can literally achieve things that no other medium has ever done. Ever. Each one of you listening to this, you have a chance to literally make a new standard for XR. And the point is, my name's John Hanachek. I'm a long-term designer and I've been exclusively in XR for the last 5 years. So this talk's going to be kind of like a little different. I'm going to try and take you behind the scenes of this technology and why it's new, why it's unique, and hopefully you can use some of the insights to create things that no one has ever thought of before and no one's ever tried. So I'm hoping this will be a very inspiring talk, since a lot of the other mentors already gave you guys great talks about kind of the basic technology. I want to take a step back and kind of like explore what is this stuff and what can you do with it. So my personal background, I'm a designer and an artist. I basically work at the intersection of creativity, curiosity, and human augmentation. So I have a master's in communication, culture, and technology from Georgetown. I'm going to take these glasses off because the Matrix joke, I think you guys got it. So in 2016, I got that, and pretty much that little trophy thing there, it's a real object. I scanned it as well. My peers voted me the most meta. So this was very honored for me because we were all very meta. It was very discussing, how technology works. What is technology? What is language? And I'm going to try and share some of that with you guys because it really changed my abilities as a designer and gave me a lot of confidence. So I've been full-time XR for over 5 years. I've done my own startups and I've been a lead designer and a product designer for multiple different headset-based technologies. And I guess I have a focus on kind of real world, using XR for the real world. So with Avatar Medic, I'm working on first responder training, command and control, and even robotic control using holograms or digital twin. Then I worked at Bad VR using wireless signals visualization and command and control interfaces. And then most recently, I was at Nano, basically leading the product and interaction design for the XR. We redesigned the entire product, which was really cool. And I'm going to show you more about that. And just doing a ton of prototypes, testing, road mapping, scoping. I've done it all. And that little picture there is just from 2018 when I kind of first went from 2D XR to joining 2D UX design to jumping full into what I know is the future, which is this immersive technology. I'm just going to do a quick rundown. Here's Avatar Medic. This is back in 2019 on the HoloLens. How do you use virtual objects to create training that scales into the real world so you can connect those dots? I was actually a lifeguard, an ocean lifeguard as a younger person. So this was really near and dear to me to try and say, how can we take training beyond the old crusty mannequins and into the future so that everyone can have access. This was a project we did for NIST as part of a challenge, command and control interface. All this stuff looks a little weird on the 2D video, but in the headset, it's a beautiful map with depth and everything. I'm not going to spend too much time on these. If you guys want me to come back to them, you can let me know in the end. But just giving you this one's the robotic control. So we got on the news for this. Basically, this is using Unity to use the virtual representation of this robot to let people command the robot through XR. So this was kind of where my work is headed more now, is like using physical reality objects with the virtual reality. And you can see in the Unity screen there, it's like basically they see the hologram of the robot and they can control it. And this was a really cool experiment. I'm really want to do more of this because, young people, all of a sudden, pretty much anyone could show up to this robot and control it. And that's the power of XR, is it makes things visible that were never visible before. Hint, hint. Here's some stuff from Bad VR. I can't show too much because it's government related, but this actually was from a time, a lot of this work was actually before Shapes XR existed. So if you're joining the field now, you're really lucky to have Shapes XR because we used to have to use things like Blender and Unity and all kinds of stuff. And now we have a more unified thing. But I just want to show you some of the work that, I was doing as a designer, was trying to think about how do we make heads up displays? How do we visualize information? In this case, Bluetooth signals, using Unity. And the point I want to show kind of here is like, as a designer in XR, you're going to be using all kinds of tools. And the point is, trying to get that sensation of experience and what have you. So finally with Nano, I'm going to show you guys some more of this in a little bit, but it's just kind of high level. Like we did a lot of different iterations. We did style things. We did all kinds of prototypes. And this was really fascinating to work with these molecular structures, which are three-dimensional. So we'll get back into that later because let's get into it. Okay. So, what is real? Huh? How do you define real, etc.? So I want to share this perspective with you, which is that language is effectively a private hallucination. Okay. When we speak about the world, we're using these symbols, and we're thinking things in our mind. When we try to explain something to someone, we're using, little symbols and words and trying to trigger something in their mind. And this is the study of semiotics, specifically. The discipline is called semiotics, and more generally communication. So here's the basic schema of semiotics. This is semiotics 101. And I'm showing you this because I think it's very important to understand how does communication really work? You have your world or your object. In this case, it's a spoon, the sign vehicle, which could be called a word or a graphic. In this case, it's the word spoon. And then here's the important part, the interpretant. It's the technical term, but he's got his little spoon in his mind, right? This is how it works. We're doing a closure. There's a gap between what we want to describe and how we talk and how do we get understanding. So this triangle here is really important, and it's going to be even more important for XR because XR is a new medium, and I'm going to explain why in a moment. But I do want to forward something that really changed my perspective back in 2017 when I heard it from Michael Labroche, who's the chief scientist at Meta Reality Labs. Basically, the reality we experience is a construct in our minds based on highly incomplete data. It generally matches the world, but it's not a reflection of reality. It's just an inference, the most probable state of the world. So when I heard this talk back in 2017, it really got me extremely excited for XR because this is a new medium where you're engaging with that illusion directly. But the point of the no spoon and the matrix jokes is I want us to be thinking about how reality is already virtual. So what do we want to do with it? And I also want us to be thinking about the difference between the old medium of like this 2D screen that we're talking on and kind of the new medium of XR. So a lot of us are familiar with this concept of the treachery of images, the famous art, because an image cannot function as the thing that it depicts. This is not a spoon, right? The famous, this is not a pipe. But this is not a spoon. It's an image. However, XR is a little weird, okay? This cannot function as a spoon, but XR is different. It uses clever illusions to be not just a media on a screen, but an actual experience happening to people. I look at it as a kind of shared imagination that is enacted through your embodiment and your perception. So XR can actually begin to function as that which it is representing. So I ask you, is this a spoon? With XR, you're getting a lot closer to something that is no longer an image, but actually an object or an experience. Now, I'm not filling my belly with this virtual soup, right? But unlike the image, this is beginning to stand in for that which it represents. Okay. And this is something really important that's kept with me through my entire career so far is XR. It's new. It's different. Treat it that way, right? XR has a different foundation than a lot of other media. It's basically perception, embodiment, and environment. This is how I break it down. Perception is how are you understanding what you're seeing? And XR uses an illusion. So I'm doing, this is stuff from Michael Labroche himself, the Morpheus of XR, where that image on the bottom right moving there, that video, this a completely physical object. It's an illusion that makes it look like you're seeing depth. The image on the upper left is a simple schematic of how XR headsets work. So I'm showing this to you because I want you to understand that XR is a perceptual medium. It's effectively a trick. So that means you do need to be mindful. There's technical reasons for why you need to be mindful, like vergence accommodation and stuff like that. But for creativity, for design, I think you need to be mindful because there might even be things you could do that no one's thought of. So if you only treat the medium as the illusion it shows you, you might miss out. Versus if you're able to remember, it's an illusion, you'll be able to work with it better. At least that's how it's worked out for me. And we talk about embodiment. So with XR, a user's entire body and environment is going to be involved in the experience, which means you have to accommodate for their physiology. You can't just ask them to do things that are impossible or too tiring. And you also have to ask them to do things that the headset can actually perceive. So here's some examples of stuff I like to do, going into shapes and drawing out curves of extreme arm, like really far arm movements versus really close, trying to understand how easy it is for someone to do something. And universities do ergonomics research all the time. So you can actually look up university ergonomics research. And I recommend that you do so because we're still in the early days of this and people are still trying to figure out how to make this the most comfortable. So like this bottom right image of the wrist menu alignment, they basically empirically studied, it's called Armstrong. You can look it up for yourself. They studied, how easy and quick is it to and accurate is it to touch different areas on the wrist. So while you might, as a designer, have a cool idea, if you combine your cool idea with the reality of the embodiment, then you're going to be able to create something that is actually usable. And this is the big difference that I've noticed between successful XR and demos is you need it to be truly usable by a person and also by lots of people. So they have different abilities and things like that. So you'll want to be thinking. I tend to tell people that accessibility is not just about accommodating others, it's about making the whole design better for everyone. So, and then finally, we have the environment where you're dealing with things like world mesh and you're dealing with world origin as well, which has a lot of little details in it that if you guys want to know more, I can go back to it. But that's actually one of the tricky things is dealing with origins, especially in multiplayer. And then there's the newer stuff of semantic tagging, which basically means, this is a meta kit. It labels stuff like tables, walls, chairs, stuff like that. So when you're dealing with XR, you have this incredible, I like to think of it as like a unified plurality. Okay. It's lots of different things that are all put together into these incredible headsets. But technically, as a designer and a developer, you should understand that these are separate things. You've got head pose tracking, eye tracking, hand tracking, microphone, all the way down to unique, weird things like EEG, brainwave reading, even fMRI, or as you saw with my work, potentially even robots. So when you're thinking about building an XR experience, I don't want you to get stuck using only kind of the standard stuff or only one or two things. You really want to be thinking about how all of these different technologies merge together to create one experience, one incredible illusion that can do anything you'd like. In a practical way, you've got stuff at interaction fidelities. This is kind of like my bread and butter as an interaction designer. And just generally, you can think about this as high, medium, and low where high, is a big emphasis on kind of immersion, details. Sometimes these will involve actual dexterity or accuracy of doing something. It doesn't have to be physical reality, but it is going to be some kind of simulated dynamic. Medium kind of balances between it, like reloading the gun or something. And it's not, you don't have to literally align the magazine. You can kind of trick it, right? Whereas high, you'd have to physically align it correctly or something like that. And then low fidelity is basically just click, kind of old school interactions like we're used to. So you're going to be using a mixture of interaction fidelities in every application. So you're going to want to know basically what fidelity you need for which thing. Like you wouldn't want to make your menu extremely high fidelity, requires a lot of effort to use, where you don't want to waste your time on places that aren't going to give you any value.
Hello, you are watching a free video on our Examento series here on YouTube. We have 12 videos planned for this. We will upload them on a weekly basis, so 12 weeks. If you want to access all of them immediately and for free, then feel free to check out our Immersive Insiders platform. We have it linked above and in the description. You can also access to our community and all of that stuff, so there's a bunch of cool things going on. Feel free to check it out and enjoy the video.
So, okay, what's up with this? Why am I telling you all this? Well, because once you understand that it's all an illusion, that it's all pieces together, you can really craft some very useful illusions. And over these years of working on this, I've kind of developed my own way of thinking about how to orient my design, because I'm going to show you a real example of why knowing the truth of this medium can help you find a better metaphor and kind of sidestep over what you thought was a problem or a goal you have that you didn't think you could surmount. If you free your mind then you might actually find that there's a whole other way to approach your issue than what you might have realized. And so I want to make sure that folks don't get stuck thinking XR is about just simulating reality. XR is actually this really interesting continuum of it can be very abstract and or it can be very grounded. So it can be very realistic. Sometimes I call the abstract like hallucination. It doesn't even have to correspond to anything in reality. And it can also be very physically strenuous to do, like you're sweating, or really physically easy. It's very relaxing. And this is something that I use as a designer all the time, just to orient myself. So let's just take a look. Something like a Beat Saber, that's pretty abstract. There's no lightsabers and flying cubes in real life, and it's very strenuous. Something like Supernatural is kind of similar, but it's a lot more grounded. So they're both very physically strenuous, but it's more grounded. So I hope you can start to see as a designer, you can orient yourself to different ways of approaching your problem. Shapes, very abstract, but it's pretty easy to do, right? It's not trying to be difficult. And the reason that this schema works out really well for me, I've seen lots of these, but this is the one I use and I want to forward to you all, is because then if you look at something like the middle here, Gun Raiders, very abstract, slightly strenuous. Population 1, maybe more in the middle, right? It's kind of grounded, but it's also kind of abstract. You fly in, and maybe it's a little easier to do physically. Then you get Half-Life Alyx, a lot more grounded, maybe a little more hard to do. So the point is not like, is this a perfectly accurate representation of how hard or how easy or how whatever? The point of thinking like this is that, for me at least, I am able to start understanding, what do I need to do to create the good experience? What am I trying to achieve? Because sometimes I see people get stuck in the kind of grounded, difficult to use because they're trying to simulate physical reality. But the thing about VR, XR, is it doesn't exist. It's an illusion. So there's no reason to simulate physical reality unless you need to. So the point here is that instead of thinking about XR as a simulation, I want us to think about XR as an illusion so that we can craft really, really good illusions, right? That are very useful. So here's a really practical case study, okay? Nanome, redesigning it from version 1 to version 2. The very first version of Nanome was created in 2016. So it's a pretty old application from back in the Rift days. And it experienced a lot of feature blow and fragmentation over the years of deployment. So that's when I got hired and we worked with the team to basically refresh it. So the metaphor or the way that Nanome 1 works is like, it's as if the molecule is a statue, and then the users move around the statue like they teleport. But the issue with this, so the good part about this is that it's easy to understand. Oh, it's an object. I'm used to objects, right? Here's an object. Okay, stand around it. But the problem was that people were teleporting on accident and they were not able to really get the right view because they were getting in each other's way. So, little hint, right? We simulated reality, but now we have the same issues of reality. So when it came time to do the redesign of Nanome 2, we started just basically from scratch and used more standard floor. So no longer like a tile system, and the more standard XR interaction toolkit floor of teleporting and free motion and all that stuff, because we wanted to test it with the users. And then we went to a few rounds of alpha testing with pharmaceutical customers, both users and non-users, like users of Nanome 1 and not users of Nanome 1. And basically the exact same issues came up. They were falsely teleporting. They couldn't figure out how to go. They were spending a lot of time trying to move around the structure and not really interacting with the structure. So I wanted a different way to do it. The team was straight up asking, I had developers straight up asking me, is there some other way we can do this? Because it's taxing on the network to try and always simulate that this object exists, because it doesn't exist. Remember what I'm saying? So what are we going to do? Well, it doesn't exist. There is no spoon. There is no molecule. It doesn't exist. So since it doesn't exist, how can we make it work better for what the users need? So instead of simulating reality, what if we made a different reality that was better? And that's the point of XR for me. So we came up with I called it non-rivalrous structures. That was the very beginning metaphor. Why can't the structure be non-rivalrous? This tennis ball only has a few views of it, right? This object. But if it's a virtual tennis ball, it's just data. So everyone could see it at the same time. So that's what we did. We messed around a lot with different prototypes. We used chairs in the office to simulate what this would be like. But basically, the idea turned into what we called spotlight and follow, where every structure can be manipulated freely, or you can subscribe to someone's view of it through a follow, or they can push out their exact view. So now there's no more teleportation. There is no movement. There is no spoon. There's only looking at the structure and adding basically a pointer that is always relative to the structure. So if I go over and I start spinning the structure around, people's pointers, those purple blobs up there, will stay relative. So if they're explaining something to me and they're kind of showing me in this way, and I want to break out of that and look at it. So if any of you guys have experienced Figma, this was basically like, how do we bring that power of spotlight and follow from 2D tools, but still make it make sense in 3D? And it did require a lot of testing, but I think we pulled it off where you're looking at the structure on your own or with each other, and you can go back and forth. But this is kind of odd, like it's a different metaphor, and yet it worked really well. When we took this back to our users, then they said, oh my gosh, this is great. Seeing stuff from each other's perspective is more helpful. People preferred it to Nanome 2. They like to just get the structure and not have to worry about where they were. And they all liked the ability of kind of, I can go off on my own while you're talking and not disrupt you, but also not get bored. This was a big issue with the other paradigm is if it's a statue, I have to wait until you're done using it. But if it doesn't exist, then I can use it while you're using it, right? Non-rivalrous. So going back to our little graph here, Nanome 1 was more maybe grounded and a little harder to use physically. It required a little more clicking around. And then we took Nanome 2 and slid it way over to the abstract and easy area. So I'm not saying, that this is the right way to do it, like that you should be trying to target making everything abstract and easy. What I'm getting at is that when we reapproached the problem and looked at what the users actually needed, it turned out that the users, they needed something that was more tuned to what they're doing rather than trying to simulate reality. So the reason that I work with this rubric here, this kind of guideline, is just really to understand, like, where am I in space? What am I going to have to explain to the user? So with this new paradigm, we have to explain a little bit more to them because there's no way to do this in physical reality. But once they see it happening in XR, they take it for granted and it becomes something that's real. And I hope you can see the full circle I'm trying to go here, which is that since it's all an illusion, you can make the right illusion for your job and not worry about, again, copying reality because reality has a lot of issues. What if we could make a better reality? And that's the power of XR, in my opinion. I'm going to go over this basically design thinking 101 type stuff. You've probably already seen a lot of this from the other mentors, but just from my perspective, I always have phases where I do research and discovery, and then there's concept exploration, and then there's mechanics validation. And that's important to do all of them because if you come up with a good idea, it might not work and you have to test it. So that image on the right is basically just my rough, like, how do I approach doing this? And for anyone who doesn't know what a how might we is, I'm just going to quickly explain that. In design world, we use this concept called how might we. It's abbreviated HMW. And it basically just means that you're not going to jump to a solution right away. You're not going to say, oh, the user one said to make the button red. User two said they couldn't find the button. Okay, so those two pieces of feedback are kind of like, what do you do with that? Well, with a how might we, you can reframe it. How might we make sure they find the right button? How might we, ensure they're clicking the right thing? Whatever. It's a way to reframe something specific into a question that you and your team can go after. So you see in the graph, how might we do this? Well, let's have some ideas and try idea 1, 2, 3. Test it, reflect, test, reflect. That's what we do, a lot of data gathering. And then you're going to understand what happened. Okay, so out of that, maybe you can pick one of the ideas. Maybe one of the ideas won. Maybe you need to combine a couple of your ideas together, or maybe none of them worked at all and you have to try over again. And you just basically do this over and over and over again. But the point that I want to bring up is just make sure you use that how might we. Don't just literally follow user feedback. We would always joke as a team that the what Henry Ford said, if you asked users what they want, they'd say they want a faster horse. And again, this is coming full circle to you as XR designers. If they say, I want X, I want, this thing to work like this, you could literally copy what they said, or you could try to understand what they want, what they mean, and then use your knowledge of XR and your ability to reconceptualize the problem to give them something that they wouldn't have thought of. Because user feedback is great, but it can also really lead you astray because they don't know what's possible, right? They're just like, responding to what you're showing them. And that's why keeping yourself open, doing that research and discovery about what's possible, doing concept exploration, and then actually validating, does this work with people, is the key. You can't really skip any of those steps. But you don't want to get bogged down early in saying, okay, I'm gonna, iterate on this one feedback I keep getting. Take a step back. You're the designers, right? You're the developers. You're gonna translate what they want into something that is possible to build and maybe something better than they could have imagined. So my main thing that I want to share with you really to conclude this, and then we can jump into the questions, is make it worth it to wear the headset. In my over 5 years of doing this with real customers, that's the biggest takeaway I've had from it all. It's still a bit annoying to put on a headset. They have to take it on, take it off, make sure it's charged. You, the designer, have to consider the entire user journey of putting the headset on, taking it off, putting it back on. You don't get to just have them in your app. You need to zoom out. You need to think about how are they going to live with your application in combination with the headset. So that includes the headset operating system. That includes, their life. Where does their headset live? What kind of space are they in? What kind of physicality do they have? Do you get what I'm saying? It's a whole, you're engaging the entire person. But the crazy thing about XR is it can literally achieve things that no other medium has ever done, ever. There's no way to create on a screen what can be done in XR. And if you know the true nature of XR from this talk gives you the little breadcrumbs, and you could for sure go deeper. But what I'm trying to communicate is that if you understand that this is an illusion, if you know that you're working with a simulation of possibility of etc., then you might be able to push XR further than anyone has ever done. And you might be able to set a new standard because this is what the team at Nano we were able to do, I think, is set a new standard. Don't make a statue. Make a non-rivalrous statue. Don't have it be an exact simulation of the way objects work in the real world. Have it be something that helps the user. And I think people will copy us. In fact, I'm almost certain that people will copy our follow spotlight thing because we copied it from 2D. That's the best part about design, is you kind of get to look at each other's concepts and say, okay, how can I adapt that? You get to look at the user needs and say, how can I fulfill them? You get to look at your own goals and say, what's the best way to express this? And of course, the important thing is you gotta free your mind. Okay. This is you guys. You're about to jump off and build stuff that no one's ever seen before. But it starts with that free mind, right? I think for me, my career started that way. I got the opportunity of starting back in 2017, 2018, when this technology was completely new. We didn't have any toolkits. We didn't have any shapes. We didn't have anything. So that was annoying and hard, but it was also really good for, I know the truth about how this technology works. So when people give me a framework, I know that that's just one way XR can be. I don't get stuck in that framework. And that's what I want to communicate for anyone here that is newer to this. If you're more of an old timer like me, maybe you're just laughing along, that's great. But I really want to make sure that we all kind of have that perspective. This stuff it's all an illusion. So what are you gonna craft with that illusion? So this is the end of the slide. Thank you.
Oh my God, John, that was so cool. I mean, the amount of information that we got here is just next level.
Yeah, I hope it
It was
didn't
more.
blow everybody over too hard. Yeah, go ahead.
No, no, no. It was like more like, how do you think out of the box? Like, I never thought about this. So super,
That's
super
what I'm
cool.
hoping is I'm hoping after this, I'm incepting everybody and I want to see what you make that totally surprises me. Where it's like, oh, I never
Hmm.
thought of that. Because that's the best part of working in this technology for me is approaching a problem again with fresh eyes, with that free mind and saying, what can I do? And really, you guys all, this is my final thing is I think you guys really I want you to really consider that each one of you listening to this and working, in your teams and stuff, you have a chance to literally make a new standard for XR. We are still really early in the game. And that's what I was hoping to make sure I communicate to all you folks is like, don't get stuck with what's being given to you because that's just the best thing that us in the industry could figure out right now. You might figure out something that's totally better, and we're all probably going to steal it later. So don't get stuck, right? Try to innovate. And also don't worry about it if you end up using a standard tool. That's not the point. It's not to say you can never be grounded or you can never use standard tools or whatever. It's just the point of consider what this stuff really is. And then you might think of something that surprises you. What's my favorite type of XR interaction? I don't have a favorite type per se. It's more about how do you deliver the value you're trying to deliver. So going back to the fidelities thing, like I like all these types because let's say I'm building a training application, right? I might need the menus to be really easy to use, very low fidelity, and then I need the step that's actually teaching the person something. That's got to be really high fidelity because if they don't know that, they they'll screw up later. So the reason that I'm not answering your question is because I don't think there is an answer, at least for me as a designer. It's like you use what is going to work best and also what you can implement. So there is an element of like, if you can't achieve something or when you test it, the users are never able to put your virtual object together or whatever, you might have to scale it back. So my favorite interaction is usually the most optimized for what I'm trying to do. And when it comes to like the spectrum of AR, VR, MR, I tend to use the term XR, extended reality, since it captures basically, for me, it captures all these different inputs and outputs. And I tend to think about this just in terms of, am I going to be addressing the physical world with the user's voice? Or am I going to be doing their hands and their eyes? Am I going to show them something with the visuals? Am I going to do audio? I don't really bother with the words, to be honest. I just focus on the inputs and the outputs and what I have access to and what I'm trying to achieve.
I think the word XR is best compared to spatial and all the other terms that everyone uses.
And that's
Um,
something I'm just gonna say really quick is the spatial thing is it's interesting, but I hope in my talk I can convince you guys that these things are not technically spatial computers. That's just one part of them. Just one part is that they can perceive the reality. But the truth of XR is that it's an illusion, right? Even the headset is having to scan the world and try to understand it, which means it doesn't really see space. The headset itself sees its own illusion of reality. So as a designer, I've actually literally had to deal with that. Like we were trying to do something where
mhm.
the headset was getting fooled by bad lighting conditions. So we had to actually pull that out because our idea wasn't working. The headset was getting tricked. So this is the thing is if you understand more high level what XR is, then you're going to hopefully be able to create more useful stuff. So let's see. There's one more question. What interaction types paradigms that have not been explored? This is a great question. I think this talk is me trying to like get everyone to start thinking like that. Like, yeah, wait, what haven't we tried yet? I don't know if I have a good answer. I think the work that we did with Nano was an interesting one because that was actually something that I think was not explored very well, which is like, how do I treat 3D data almost like it's a document where everyone can be part of it, but they don't have to physically be part of it. Like they don't have to literally like what am I saying? Like I actually think exploring, I'll use the little continuum here. Exploring this side of it, the abstract, easy side of it, is something I don't see folks maybe do a lot. Even though I have these examples, I still think that a lot of folks they think that VR is supposed to be really grounded and like a simulation of reality or a spatial computer that understands space. But I think exploring more of the hallucinogenic kind of abstract side of it and really particularly understanding the physical work. I actually think the best way I can answer this question is interactions. Do your best, explore what's possible. I think we haven't explored, everything totally, but the one thing I really think we need to focus on is the physical effort. A lot of people's experiences, if you try to use them for more than a couple hours, you have an issue. And that's something I really want to drive home is like people are not exploring enough, in my opinion, the physicality of XR. How hard is this to use? You make a cool little interaction of like do a flick or hit your wrist. Now try to do that for 3 hours. So the difference of my career is I've been building tools that people use in their job. And so I have to constantly keep in my mind, is this going to make sense to them? Can I explain it to them if it doesn't make sense? And can they physically do this for hours? Do they even have the space in their room to do this? So I think it's kind of like you're going to find game-changing ideas by taking that step back and seeing what XR offers you and then connecting that dot with what you're trying to make. And that's where I think you're going to find some really interesting ideas. And I hope that helps, but I'm like, it's an open field is what I'm trying to say. We have a lot of toolkits and I think the other mentors probably covered really great toolkits and how to do that and stuff. But I'm just want to make sure everybody kind of takes that moment to say like, wait, but the toolkits are just an illusion. The toolkits were made up. What if I needed to make a different toolkit? So I don't know your problem. And that's maybe my final thought about this is that every time, if I start from the technology, I'll make the same thing every time. XRI, you know, interactions, whatever. But if I start from the problem or my goal or my fun art idea and try to figure out how to make that work using technology, well, then I might surprise myself. And that's what we did at Nanome is we just basically started over and said, instead of trying to work with what we were given, let's create something we need and then make it work. You're watching, yeah, Dynamic Land. Nice. I'm just reading your comment. Yeah, so Dynamic Land's a big inspo for me, honestly. If you guys don't know Brett Victor, I highly recommend taking a look at Dynamic Land. It was kind of part of the innovation for Nanome is that you are creating this co-located experience where you're all engaging with data and basically engaging with knowledge together. So I think XR becomes a medium for thought when you're able to detach yourself from using XR as a simulation of reality. Because people can think, Brett Victor likes this phrase, try to use your tool to let people think unthinkable thoughts. Okay. So he uses the example of the invention of calculus. Before calculus, you had to do all these other math nonsense things, and then they invented calculus, and now we can do all these complicated things. XR itself is like that for me, where in the past you had to focus on what you could represent and you had to, deal with images. But now with XR, you can actually deal with experiences. So now that's why I call it a shared imagination, because, right, we used to only think privately. I say spoon and you guys think in your brain a spoon. Or I show you an image and then you have to interpret that. But XR is a little different, right? It's new. So it gets us a chance to actually go inside of your mind. Or you could create your mind and then take someone there. That's what the scientists use Nanome for. They basically they take their mind and they put it out onto the structure. They add labels, they put measurements, they put stuff. And then they bring their colleagues in with them. And now they combine their knowledge. So they basically align their understanding of it by using this much more robust experience of the XR, where it used to take them, hours to try and communicate on a 2D screen. Look, it's the spoon. It's like this, and nobody can see the edge. Nobody can see anything. And then they just jump right into XR and go, oh, I see. It's this big. Or, oh, that's that distance from this. So you're taking something that's completely imaginary that chemists could talk about, but now you're making it physical, an experience that people can have. So like me, when I joined and I didn't know barely any chemistry, I was learning along by basically being inside of their imagination, not just reading a book. I'm like in there with them. So I think understanding that we're creating this illusion of perception and it's also embodied and it's also dealing with the environment means that if you want to so that's why Dynamic Land is so amazing, right? Because you're doing thinking, you're creating weird programs and stuff, you're embodied, so you're physically moving around. Maybe part of thinking is actually that movement, right? I can't move too far because I'm in 2D screen, but in VR we can dance, we can jump. Those are part of thinking that we don't tend to. In fact, Brett Victor himself talks about how this rectangular medium that we're all in is kind of inhumane because it cuts us off from stuff we do, like movement. It cuts us off from the environment and it cuts us off from our depth perception. So here comes XR, able to do that anywhere. So you can do it in the middle of a field. Dynamic land is cool, but it relies on a building. I like the XR headsets because they can go outside, they can go inside, they can be anywhere and still give you that possibility of creating a shared thinking space where you're actually trying to bridge that gap between spoon, you know, to actually something that's an experience. So hopefully that gives you some inspo. How to use an advantage to blend the physical world. Yeah, so I'm gonna read Agata's comment. So the illusion part of it. I actually think my most concrete example so far in my career was the robot that I did. So using this the hologram of the robot combined onto the robot was really odd because normally when you have a robot, you just see the object, right? You just see the robot itself. But with XR, you can see the robot's past state, its current state, and its future state. So you're actually getting you're this kind of vision of like, oh, I know what the robot's going to do and I know what it's done. So in the physical world, the robot's just sitting there or it's moving. But in the virtual world, or the overlay is what I basically did with this, when you combine them together, now you've created this extended reality where you can actually see the inside state of the robot on the outside. So for you as a simple human, I'm just a little ape, right? I can now use my normal human faculty to be like, oh, I think the robot's going to hit something. Or, oh, wait, I don't want him to do that next. I need him to do this. And instead of having to like be in the computer and read the code, you're just looking at it. So this is kind of the like, you can use the illusion and connect it to reality, or you can use the illusion completely on its own to create an experience, something like Gumball Dreams or VR chat worlds where they're kind of really crazy, right? And you can, again, either lean into the physical world or lean totally virtual, or even combine them where you're giving the physical world something virtual that can't exist. But together, they do exist because as far as we're concerned, right? Michael Abrash tells us our whole reality is basically virtual. So if you can convince the person doing your thing that it's real, it is. If it brings them value, brings them joy, and that's where I like your question of like, you don't always have to use the laws of physics. Sometimes you want to subvert the laws of physics because here, when I drop, like this has to drop right in the physical world, but in VR, not necessarily, right? So you just want to be deliberate about using, and that's why I bring this up is you want to be deliberate about when are you using physics versus when are you completely ignoring it? When is it hard to do versus when is it easy to do? So I have a blog, so it's kind of a shameless self plug for my spatial design blog, which I kind of go into more of like the technical side of this. Somebody asked which was the XR design worth mentioning. I can kind of go over that really quick. I think I deliberately picked these examples because I'm fascinated by all of them. There's more, but I think I can kind of explain like these are each really effective designs. And they know what they are. So Beat Saber, it knows it's a completely abstract thing that is hard. And that's what it is. That's what it is. It doesn't try to be anything else. Supernatural knows that it wants to try to ground you a little bit in the physical world, but it also knows that it's trying to make you work out. So it doesn't have to obey the physics. It just needs to get you to work out, right? You see what I mean? It doesn't need to listen to make a medicine ball or whatever. It just needs to get you to work out. So that opens up a lot of design. Half-Life Alyx is really amazing because it combines this super realistic world. However, if you play it, you notice it's not a perfect simulation. Like when you reload the thing, you can't miss or you can't totally screw it up. It gives you a little bit of help. So it's an important one because you can go really far. You notice I didn't put it all the way to the edge of grounded because like I can't disassemble the gun and break it, right? It still gives me a little bit of helper. So it's that balance of like those designers knew that they wanted it to feel immersive, but not be frustrating. And this is the big thing about XR that I pay attention to is like you can't, if you're just going for realism or whatever you're trying to go for, you have to make sure it's not frustrating. So if it's too realistic, now you've created this huge issue. If it's a training thing and it's supposed to be hard and frustrating because they need to learn how to do it, then that makes sense. But if it's a video game, why would you make it unnecessarily complicated? What are you trying to optimize for? So that's like, then Gun Raiders is really fun because you have to hold your arms up like this to fly and then kind of go like this. So that's really abstract, but it adds this other element of like difficulty that is kind of fun. And then, Shapes is like the most meta one of all because it's the design tool to design other tools. But I will say really quickly about Shapes is that I put it on this graph because you have to remember as designers that Shapes has its own metaphor. Shapes works a lot like I was telling you guys how Nano 1 works. An object in Shapes is something that exists and you move around it or you move the world. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because we used Shapes to design Nano 2, but I had to deliberately not use Shapes to finalize the design because Shapes comes with its own metaphor. So I hope you understand what I'm saying is that every tool you use already had a bunch of choices made by designers about how it works. So if you want to stay totally pure and focused on your outcome, you just need to be mindful that Figma, Shapes, all these softwares, they all have their own metaphors. And you just need to make sure that you don't let their metaphor leak into your project on accident, right? So you have to control, like, okay, I know Shapes XR does this a certain way, but it's not the way I want to do it for this project. So I'm going to keep a boundary on, how I approach this or how I explain it to people. That's why we actually straight up started using office chairs, like physical office chairs, because they let us do little play acting with each other. So I guess hopefully that answers your question. It's like there's all kinds of wonderful XR designs, but what really gets me is ones that are effectively doing what they're supposed to. That's another Matrix line. If the ones doing what they're supposed to, they do it all the time. You never know, but you don't want those vampires, werewolves, and aliens unless you do, right? I'm hoping that you'll all see you can be really deliberate about what you're giving your user. But I have seen other XR designs that fail because they didn't really consider what they were offering and what their metaphor was. They just made a thing and then it doesn't connect. So you want to make sure, like all these examples I put up here are deliberately pretty different, but also really similar. And there's so much place you can play as a designer, even if the idea feels old or the concept has like been done a million times. There's probably another way to do it that no one's thought of, or you could take it to a different dimension that no one's thought of. You could combine it with the real world more, or take it away from the real world, or mix. And there's so many things that you can do with XR that the point is you definitely want to explore experiences, go use a lot of them, but also hopefully take this perspective with you of like, what do these share in common? What are they different? What is this making me do? How does this make me feel versus the other one? So all that type of stuff. It's not a specific answer, right? Or it's kind of specific, but uh, yeah, wristband system. Totally. This is great. That is a new interaction paradigm. I'd say it probably fits on an input. It's somewhere here like controller in hand, right? But it's different. It's a little bit new. It's you don't have to physically grab a controller, and you also don't have to worry about line of sight, for the hands, right? If you take the hand away from the headset, it can't see your hand anymore. That's what I mean by the headset is also perceiving reality. So you have to make sure your stuff works. The wristband opens up a whole new thing for interaction. But I hope after this talk, you can see for you guys, that might seem specific, but it's actually just fits right back into this XR where you're thinking, okay, I could build an application that would let the user do it with controllers, with pure hand tracking, and then maybe they could add the wrist in. So as a designer, what I often think about is like, what's the most likely setup that a customer is going to have or a user or whatever? And then what are like the ways you can make that better? So they'll always have access to hand tracking. They'll always have access to a controller. But then if they get access to that wristband, do you change your experience a little bit? Make the design, slightly different or whatever. So I think the point of this talk is that we haven't figured this out yet. There's not like a pure like computer mouse, QWERTY keyboard thing for XR, including keyboards like don't, if you can figure out a better way to do a keyboard, you could make all of us really happy. There's certain things in XR we still haven't figured out. So as new stuff gets added and new ideas are brought in and new technologies from, Orion wristband to maybe brain reading, eye tracking, whatever, you as a designer can just be like, oh, okay, this is just an affordance. That's the word we use, affordance for me to work with. Instead of thinking about it as like, oh, I'm going to make an app for the wristband, you can take a step back and be like, well, how would using that wristband fit into my other design? How could I make an app that would work across a bunch of different ways of working? If their controllers are dead, can they use their hands? If they have the wristband, then I'll turn off I'm not going to go too deep into it, but the point is like, we're getting a lot of cool technology. And I think we're going to look back on this time and be like, that was kind of old. Like, remember old cell phones that were like plugged into your car and stuff and they were huge? We're kind of in that era. I kind of feel like we're in maybe the Macintosh era of computers where there's a lot more to do. And so, as a designer, if you are able to kind of take a step back and realize, all this technology is an illusion, then you're going to be able to figure out, well, what's the best tool for me to craft my best illusion? And it might be the wristband. It might be, you know, it might be no interaction at all. That's another thing. I'll end here. It's a bit of a weird one, but sometimes good interactions are no interactions. How can you think about the user not even having to do anything? So every decision you make is going to all combine into this new medium in a way that's never been possible before. And it also means that you've got more risks and you need to test stuff. So that's my final thing. It's like, try things. Don't just get stuck with what's given. Understand what you're doing, understand your options for how to solve that, but then try stuff with yourself, with your friends. Ideally, if you work at a company or whatever, you can get users. You can find users, around. And if you're going to test stuff in like Shapes XR or whatever, just understand that I have to do this a lot. I have to explain, okay, this is how the prototype is supposed to work, but here's some of the limits of the software. So when I tell the users, I have to get them to imagine. So what's interesting is we're still kind of in this era of like, you're using a combination of real technology with imagination, which is why I wanted to forward this concept of semiotics is like, you as a developer of software, you're trying to close this triangle where the world makes sense, the signals are clear, and the user knows what's happening. And this is like basic. This applies to just like human language, but it carries through into design so that now, in theory, you guys should be able to use any technology that gets invented ever because you understand what design is trying to do. And so it won't matter what the specifics are because you can always update based on, what options you have.
All right. So that was super cool. Thank you so much, John, for taking all your time to give us this wonderful lecture and answer all these questions.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I'm excited to see what you're all going to make because I'm serious. Like, although I've been in the industry for 5 years, I know for a fact I've barely seen anything, right? I've barely seen what we can do with this technology. So I'm really excited, for what you guys will kind of show us. And also, there's no shame or problem with using great tools and stuff from other people. The
Mhm.
main point is just that's not the only way to do it, right? It's an illusion. So you might think of something that no one's thought of, and that's totally valid. Or you might have a goal that's perfectly solved by XRI or whatever. That's also totally valid. As long as you can keep this in the back of your mind, you should be able to build basically anything and surprise us all, with what's possible with this new medium.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining and have a nice day, afternoon, or night, wherever you're joining us from. And yep, see you soon. All right.
For your
Bye
mind, guys.
bye.